Dear students, in the previous lecture, I have discussed the conceptual framework of terrorism, like what terrorism is, what are its causes, and how it originated. In today's lecture, I am going to discuss various efforts made by UN, especially the UN Security Council, to combat this problem of terrorism. First, we will try to know how UN Charter advocates the eradication of international terrorism. Or in other words, what are the provisions in the UN Charter which talk about eradication of terrorism? Or what are the important provisions in the UN Charter which provides basis for addressing terrorism and maintaining international peace and security? Dear students, the UN Charter serves as the foundational document that outlines the legal framework for counterterrorism efforts within the context of international law and norms. There are several key provisions of the UN Charter which provide the basis for addressing terrorism and maintaining international peace and security. For example, Article 1. It says the primary purpose of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security. And Chapter 6 of the Charter outlines the peaceful settlement of disputes through negotiation, mediation, arbitration, and other peaceful means. So these provisions establish the framework for addressing conflicts and tensions that may give rise to terrorism. Article 2 of the Charter prohibits the threat or use of force by states in their international relations, except in cases of self defense or when authorized by the UN Security Council for the maintenance of international peace and security. Chapter 7 provides mechanisms for the Security Council to take action, including sanctions or military intervention, to address threats to peace, breaches of the peace, or acts of aggression that may include terrorist activities. Article 55 and 56. Article 55 of the Charter calls for promoting universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction on the basis of race, sex, language, or religion. Article 56 further requires all member states to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the United Nations to promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedom. So these provisions underscore the importance of protecting human rights while combating terrorism. Article 1, Clause 3 and Article 2, Clause 3. Article 1, Clause 3 of the Charter emphasizes the importance of international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Article 2, Clause 3 calls on all member states to settle their international disputes by using peaceful means and to refrain from the threat or use of force. So these provisions highlight the need for collaborative efforts in addressing terrorism by using diplomacy, legal, and multilateral means. Are Chapter 5 and 6 and 7. It talks about the role of the UN Security Council. The Security Council, as the principal organ responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, plays a central role in addressing terrorism. Chapter 5, 6, and 7 of the Charter outline the powers and responsibilities of the Security Council in preventive diplomacy, peacekeeping, and enforcement actions to counter threats to peace and security, including terrorism. So we can say, dear students, the UN Charter provides the legal framework for counter-terrorism efforts by emphasizing the prohibition of use of force respect for human rights, promotion of international cooperation, and the central role of the Security Council in maintaining international peace and security. These provisions guide the actions of member states and the United Nations in addressing the complex challenges posed by terrorism while upholding the principles of international law and human rights. Now we are going to discuss the importance of UN for making efforts for counterterrorism. Means why UN is important for combating this global problem, that is terrorism. As we know that in today's interconnected, interdependent world, terrorism poses a significant threat to global peace, security, and stability. As non state actors continue to perpetuate acts of violence aimed at instilling fear and advancing political, ideological, or religious agendas, the need for collective international action to combat terrorism has become more pressing than ever. In this context, the UN plays an important role in coordinating and facilitating global efforts to prevent, to counter, and to eradicate terrorism. Why UN is important? The first reason is universal membership and legitimacy. As you know, the UN is a universal organization with nearly every country in the world as its member. This universal membership gives it legitimacy in its efforts to coordinate counterterrorism actions, to ensure that diverse perspectives and interests are taken into account. The UN is also important in this sense it provides a strong legal framework for counterterrorism efforts through various resolutions, conventions, and treaties. These legal instruments establish norms, standards, and obligations for member states to adhere to in combating terrorism, enhancing global cooperation and coordination. The UN also serves as an important platform for member states to exchange information, to share best practices, and to coordinate strategies in the fight against terrorism. Bodies such as Security Council, General Assembly, specialized agencies like the UN Office of Counterterrorism. These bodies facilitate dialogue and collaboration among member states. The UN also supports member states in building their capacities to prevent, to respond to terrorist threats through technical assistance, training programs, and resource mobilization. This assistance helps to strengthen national counterterrorism frameworks, improve border security, and enhance law enforcement and judicial cooperation. The UN also promotes international cooperation and solidarity in addressing root causes of terrorism, such as poverty, inequality, and conflict. By promoting dialogue, conflict resolution, and development assistance, the UN addresses underlying grievances and reduces the appeal of terrorist ideologies. By upholding human rights and the rule of law, UN is also playing an important role in counterterrorism. This UN emphasizes the importance of respecting fundamental freedoms, ensuring due process, and protecting civilians in all counterterrorism activities, thus safeguarding against abuses and promoting legitimacy. The UN also adopts a comprehensive approach to counterterrorism that includes prevention and countering violent extremism. Through initiatives like the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy and the Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism, The UN addresses the underlying drivers of radicalization and extremism. It promotes inclusive societies and resilience. So we can say, dear students, the UN plays a crucial role in coordinating global efforts to combat terrorism by providing a universal platform for dialogue, establishing legal norms and standards, facilitating cooperation among member states, and promoting a comprehensive approach that addresses root causes and respects human rights. As terrorism remains a complex and evolving threat, the UN's leadership and coordination are indispensable in ensuring a collective response that upholds peace, security, and human dignity worldwide. Now, dear students, we will try to understand the role of UN in counterterrorism efforts. The United Nations, through its various organs, through its various agencies, plays a crucial role in coordinating global efforts to combat terrorism. One of the key entities, key organs within the UN responsible for addressing terrorism is the Security Council, which holds a central role in maintaining international peace and security. The UN Security Council plays a critical role in coordinating and leading global efforts to combat terrorism. Its authority, outlined in Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, empowers it to take collective action in response to threats to international peace and security. So, UN Security Council plays central role in counterterrorism efforts. For example, the UN Security Council adopts resolutions that establish legal frameworks, norms, and measures to address this problem of terrorism. These resolutions define terrorism, condemn terrorist attacks, and call upon member states to implement specific counterterrorism measures. For example, the Resolution 1373, which was adopted in 2001 in response to the 9/11 attack. This resolution imposed binding obligations on all member states to combat terrorism, including criminalizing terrorist financing and enhancing border security. The UN Security Council also has the authority to impose targeted sanctions on individuals, groups, and entities which are involved in or supporting terrorist activities. These sanctions may include asset freezes, travel bans, and arms embargoes, which aim at disrupting terrorist networks and preventing their access to resources. An example is the sanction imposed on individuals and entities associated with Al Qaeda and the Taliban, which was taken as per the provisions of this resolution 1267. The UN Security Council may also mandate peacekeeping operations to address conflicts and instability that may facilitate terrorist activities. Peacekeeping missions may include efforts to promote dialogue, reconciliation, and the rule of law, as well as to build the capacity of national authorities to combat terrorism. For instance, the UN Multi-Dimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali supports the Malian government in its efforts to combat terrorism and stabilize the country. The UN Security Council also encourages member states to enhance international cooperation in the fight against terrorism. It emphasizes the importance of information sharing, intelligence cooperation, and joint law enforcement efforts to prevent terrorist attacks, prosecute perpetrators, and disrupt terrorist networks. For example, the Resolution 2178, which was adopted in 2014, called upon states to enhance cooperation in identifying and countering the foreign terrorist fighter phenomena. The UN Security Council recognizes the importance of addressing the root causes of terrorism, including political grievances, socio-economic inequalities, and human rights abuses. It calls upon member states to promote inclusive governance, respect for human rights, and socio-economic development as part of the comprehensive strategies to prevent radicalization and extremism. For instance, Resolution 2354, which was adopted in 2017, emphasizes the importance of addressing conditions which are conducive to the spread of terrorism. The UN Security Council also responds to specific threats to international peace and security posed by terrorist activities. It may authorize military action, peace enforcement measures, or other coercive measures to counter terrorist threats, particularly when diplomatic and preventive measures prove inadequate. For example, Resolution 2249, which was adopted in 2015, gave authority to member states to take all necessary measures to combat ISIS and Daesh in Iraq and Syria. The UN Security Council also monitors and assesses the implementation of its resolutions, which are related to counterterrorism. It receives regular reports from its specialized committees, expert panels, and relevant UN bodies on the evolving nature of terrorist threats, trends in terrorism financing, and compliance with sanctions measures. These reports from the Council's decisions and actions in combating terrorism effectively. So, dear students, we can say the UN Security Council's role in counterterrorism efforts is multifaceted. It includes legal, diplomatic, preventive, and enforcement measures through the adoption of resolutions, imposition of sanctions, mandate of peacekeeping operations, promotion of international cooperation, addressing root causes, response to specific threats, and monitoring and reporting. The UN Security Council seeks to mitigate the impact of terrorism and uphold international peace, security, and human rights. Dear students, now we are going to discuss some of the important resolutions which were passed by the UN Security Council for counterterrorism. As we know, the UN Security Council has played an important role in shaping international counterterrorism efforts through the adoption of various resolutions. One of the most significant resolutions in this regard is Resolution 1373, which was adopted in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack in the United States. This resolution was adopted unanimously in 2001 under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, making it legally binding on all member states. It aims to enhance international cooperation in the fight against terrorism by establishing comprehensive legal framework and imposing obligations on member states to prevent and suppress terrorist activities. The key provisions of this resolution include criminalizing the financing of terrorism and freezing assets of individuals and entities which are involved in terrorist attacks, strengthening border controls and improving information sharing mechanisms to prevent the movement of terrorists and their supporters, enhancing domestic legal frameworks to prosecute and extradite individuals for terrorist activities. This resolution led to the establishment of Counterterrorism Committee to monitor the implementation of this resolution and assist member states in fulfilling their obligations. So, this Counterterrorism Committee was established as per provisions of this resolution to oversee the implementation of counterterrorism measures by member states. It comprises all 15 members of the UN Security Council and operates through a system of expert groups and working groups to assess states' compliance with the resolution's provisions. This counterterrorism committee conducts regular reviews of member states' progress in implementing counterterrorism measures, provides technical assistance and capacity building support, and facilitates cooperation between member states and relevant international organizations. This adoption of Security Council's resolution, especially Resolution 1373, has a significant impact on international counterterrorism efforts. First, this resolution imposed legally binding obligations on all member states to take specific measures to prevent and to suppress terrorist activities, including criminalizing terrorist financing and enhancing border security. Member states are also required to report on their implementation of the resolution's provisions to the Counterterrorism Committee, therefore promoting transparency and accountability in counterterrorism efforts. This resolution also led to the establishment of the Counterterrorism Committee. So, the creation of this Counterterrorism Committee provided a dedicated mechanism for monitoring and assessing member states' compliance with the provisions of this resolution. Counter-Terrorism Committee plays a central role in facilitating international cooperation, providing technical assistance, and identifying areas where states require support to enhance their counterterrorism capabilities. These Security Council resolutions have catalyzed international cooperation in combating terrorism by promoting dialogue, information sharing, and joint initiatives among member states and relevant regional and international organizations. So, by promoting a coordinated approach to counterterrorism, these resolutions have strengthened the collective response to the global threat posed by these terrorist organizations. So, dear students, the Security Council's resolutions, especially Resolution 1373 and the establishment of Counterterrorism Committee, have been instrumental in shaping international counterterrorism efforts by imposing legal obligations on member states, enhancing cooperation, and providing support for capacity building. These resolutions have contributed to a more strong and coordinated response to the scourge of terrorism worldwide. In today's lecture, we have seen that United Nations, guided by the principles of its charter, plays an important role in coordinating global efforts to combat terrorism. Through legal frameworks, international cooperation, and the enforcement mechanisms of the Security Council, the UN addresses the multifaceted challenges posed by terrorism while upholding human rights and promoting peace and security worldwide. Dear students, we have also seen that the Security Council resolutions, especially Resolution 1373 and the establishment of Counterterrorism Committee. Dear students, we have also seen that the Security Council resolutions, particularly Resolution 1373 and the establishment of the Counterterrorism Committee, have been instrumental in shaping international counterterrorism efforts by imposing legal obligations on member states, enhancing cooperation, and providing support for capacity building. These resolutions have contributed to a more strong and coordinated response to the scourge of terrorism worldwide. Thank you.